So we're going to start off at the beginning of the book, as I said, and come on, we can work. There we go. What is Oracle? Well, if you want to see the Hokey movie,
What is an oracle? I think the most famous oracle that a lot of people have heard of is the oracle at Delphi. Now, I happened to live in Greece for 2 years before I came here. I have been to Delphi. It is an extraordinary place.
enough. A lot of people think, however, that Oracle is magical, mystical. It's whatever's behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. That's not the case. Oracle is a powerful relational database. It was one of the first ones on the scene, and it offers a unique operating system, management system, if you will, and it can handle large sets of data. One of the things that you're going to get led astray with in the initial part of our class is that the database that we learn on has maybe 15 to 25 records. And so your responses are instantaneous, and there's not a lot of data to search through. After we get into Oracle, and if you are all going on to advanced database, we'll wait and do it the first week there. If not, we'll do it the last week we're here. I have a database with about 1.5 million records in it. And so you'll see when we implement that database that your searches don't take tenths of a second. They take quite a bit longer. And we'll talk about how you design those types of databases as we go through. As the slide said, along with Microsoft Server, Oracle is widely regarded. Those two are the most popular. SQL, Microsoft gives away in most instances. Oracle, they sell. And the last time I checked Oracle for one of my clients when I was consulting, an initial setup, a server and a 3-site license was a little over $8,000 plus an annual renewal fee. So it is not a cheap program. However, if you want to go out to the Oracle website and download the standalone version, it's going to eat up some space on your computer, and Oracle will always run in the background. So it's going to eat up some compute cycles, but it's a database that you could download and experiment with at home. Again, as I said on Tuesday night, there are two things that the people at Oracle hate: the end user and Windows. And we come in number 2, so at least they hate somebody other than us first. Chapter 1, we get into a description of SQL, and again, I want to remind you that SQL is pretty much a language that can be transported between different relational database engines. So the basics that we learn in SQL here will transfer over to SQL Server if you want to use it. Now, I have to tell you, each one of the database engines has their own little picadillo on what they want to do or how they want things coded. But what you're going to learn is the general SQL process, and it's easily transferable across. All this you can take a look at in your textbook as we go through. By the way, anything that we do in class, anything that we do in the lab, I encourage you to go ahead and use your textbook as a reference. When you get out in the real world, when Denise programs Oracle out at the FAA, she's got all kinds of references to work from. And so I encourage you to bring that book in and go ahead and use it, get familiar with it. A lot of the textbooks I teach from, I tell my students, hey, rent this one, lease it, whatever you can do, don't keep it. This is one you want to keep. There are a lot of good references in this textbook, especially if you're going to go on and you're going to work with Oracle somewhere down the road. It's really, really good. Well, this is a little background about SQL and what we're doing. Same here, relational database. One way to organize data in the computer. There are several different ways if you want to think about it. SQL can recall the data or bring the data back to you fairly easily, as it said. As it says there, you can look at that information and remember on Tuesday night we talked about how far back does this go. And relational databases were talked about for a long time. And remember, Lee told us flat files were the first databases that were out there. Relational databases were theory up until the early 70s when we could get the compute power and the operating systems to actually make them functional. And from then, they've expanded and contracted as we go, but they work pretty much as advertised. Important fact, relational database. All the data is kept in a table. And that's a two-dimensional structure right now. In the future, may not be. Columns and rows, all right? We'll try and use the appropriate advanced database terms while we're in the class. So when we talk about a table as a two-dimensional structure with those columns and rows, what we are looking for is an intersection of a column and an intersection of a row, and that will be the data that we are looking for. Believe it or not, any data that you can think of in one way or another can be represented in a table. Everything from numeric functions to movies and 3D images. So again, a relational database is a very useful tool once you get working with it. Table rows, that's going to represent one object or one event or one relationship or one of whatever we are collecting data rows. All rows in one table have to represent the same object. All right, so if we create a table called students, then all of the rows in that table will talk about students. All right, we wouldn't have cars in there or somebody's record collection. All it's going to talk about is students. Now, the other thing you need to remember when we talk about Oracle is Oracle doesn't necessarily even maintain the data in the way that you put it into the computer. It will maintain it the way it thinks it's most efficient. And so we get that data back out of Oracle by using our SQL structure. Table columns, that is going to represent a particular type of information that we're collecting about our table object. And really when we get into relational databases, we start talking about objects. If you've been through 4GL programming somewhere, you know all 4GL programming is pretty much object-oriented, and so that might help you a little bit as you go through here. Some columns can be nulls, and others can require data. It's all right to have a null field in Oracle or in a relational database for a while, but you don't want to design a field that's going to stay null for an indefinite period of time. And let me give you an example. Let's say we create a table that we are maintaining information about employees. And when an employee starts with us, we record their hire date, we record their name, we probably use their employee number as a primary key that uniquely identifies that person. But they may not have the birth date or the social security number or whatever of their significant other with them or a child with them. So we would want that data filled in, but we would leave it null until we could get it in. So it's okay to have a null for a while in a database. One of the ways to get around that is you might want to create a yes, no, or a true, false field, where an event that's relating to the object you're collecting data on can be either true or false. And that way we get away from the null. Now, null field means absolutely in Oracle the absence of data. All right, so it's a pristine field that's never been touched. The database from hell that you'll get to see more and more of. One of the things that the designer did, and I never could figure out what he was doing, when I asked him when I started the conversion, I said, all these fields that are blank are null, right? And he said, yeah, they're null. They have no data in them. So I started to work on the database, and Oracle kept saying, nope, that is not a null field. That has data in it. Now, what the heck is going on? So finally, I drugged Daryl over to the off-base office, and I said, look, Oracle's telling me that is not a null field. Oh, yes, it is. All it has in it is spaces. I said, what do you mean it has spaces in it? That means it has data. Well, no, a space doesn't mean anything. In Oracle, it does. And by the way, not only did it have one space in, the guy that actually designed a database in fields that had no data put in 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 spaces. They all meant something to him when he designed the database. But since he quit the company and left, nobody had any clue as to why there were spaces in those attributes in the database. So you'll hear more about that. But in Oracle, in a relational database with SQL, a null field means totally the absence of data. All right, where we have, come on in, you have not missed much at all. Where we have a row and a column meet, we'll refer to that as a cell. And you may see it referred to as a data cell at one time or another, but that contains a specific piece of information about the object that we're collecting for. And normally what we do with our SQL is go in and identify one or more of those cells that we want to see for some specific reason. So when we talk about columns then, we are talking about a collection of cells that run vertically. Okay? Some other terms that we need to talk about. Entity, we refer to as a table. So that's the object that we're collecting information about, all right, or data. We take data and turn it into information. An entity instance is one row within that table. So that is going to represent one object that we are collecting information about within that entity. So that's an entity instance. And then an entity attribute or attributes are actually the columns within that table. So a row, an entity instance equals a specific object. An attribute equals a piece of data about that object that we're looking for. And again, the textbook goes over this. You can look at it. This is the Cliff Notes version, if you will. Primary key is something that we need to talk about, and we'll actually go through several exercises during a couple of lectures where we take a look at primary keys. In SQL, in most relational databases, they prefer your primary key to be all numeric because it's easier to sort that way. And there are some things that I'll talk to you about in advanced database about what administrators can do to help clean up databases that make it much, much easier if your primary key is numeric. So just about all of the tables I think we'll be working with in the Oracle class this 8 weeks all have numeric keys as their primary key. Now, some guidelines for that. Each table can contain one and only one numeric key of a specific value. So if we said that our primary keys will begin at 1,000, then the first object that we record data about will have a primary key of 1,000. And no other object in that table can have a primary key of 1,000. So it's a value that uniquely identifies an entity instance within our table or within our object. Now, you can design primary keys that are alphanumerics. It gets really complicated if you design them as strictly alpha characters. And we'll look at a couple of those, and we'll look at some of the drawbacks that we can have with that. Primary key, usually recorded as the first attribute in a table. So the first thing that's going to be generated is a primary key. And there are a couple of different ways that can be done. It can be a primary key like your student number that's generated from another computer and manually typed in. It can be a sequential number that I'll teach you how to generate in Oracle, and it'll create that primary key every time you add a new entity instance. Or there are cases where people actually design a database and they say, you know what, I don't want to know the primary key, I'm going to let Oracle do all of it for me. And so if you don't identify a primary key as you create your entities, Oracle will create a primary key function behind the scene, and every record that you enter, every entity instance that you enter, Oracle will assign a unique primary key to it. When we get into advanced database, we look at how we can go in and look at those if we want to. The caution I give you is if you're using Oracle to assign hidden primary keys and you mess one up, you can lose some of your data as you go through. So a little bit of information on primary keys. Again, when we get a little closer to what actually creating some, I'll tell you a little bit more about them and some interesting stories about what's happened with bad primary key considerations. All right. You've got some background in the database. What I want to do now is walk you through Oracle and SQL Developer on vSphere. I'd like you to watch, not do, so you can see what's going on. And then we're going to recycle the slides, and we'll go through each one so you guys can play on your own and get in and work with it. Okay, as the sign says. When you log in, you may find, and this is the login, and this PowerPoint, along with the video, I'll put the PowerPoint out there also. When you go to log in, you may get a security certificate warning. Go ahead and ignore that. And that secure site that you're looking for is vccyber.rose.edu. All right, if you need to download vSphere, you don't want to use it here at the school, or you'd like to be able to do this at home, I've got a download site that you can go to, and you can look at the information and figure out how to download that. I believe that still also comes up when you try and log into vSphere. All right, a couple things on this slide that we need to pay attention to. The IP address / name is always at vc.cyber.rose.edu. And let me ask this question. How many of you are already familiar with the vSphere and have your own accounts and are rolling? Okay, 2. So we're going to walk through this for the rest. You guys may take a nap. James, Lee, go run down to the student union, get a snack, whatever. Your username, you'll put your username in there, and I believe it's keyed to your login here at Rose State. For the accounts I created, that may be a little bit different, but we'll take a look at that. Those of you who have an account know your password. If it is a vSphere account I created for you, the password is capital P, password 1. and the rest of password is lowercase. So capital P, password 1. I think I've got a slide on that you'll see. When you open up, you'll see the vCenter Labs here at Rose, and what you want to go down and take a look at is Rose State. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, you want to find our Oracle class under the Rose listing. And so it'll be under the folder Rose State-OK. There'll be several other CIT classes in there, but we are CIT 1293 Oracle. And each one of you has a folder in that, a folder under Spring 2015, and you should be able to access it with your Rose State login. When you get that folder open, then you can start the virtual machine, and they're numbered Oracle 1 through 8. There is not an Oracle 5. For some reason, it doesn't like to run, so we killed it. The XP machine, we're using XP until we make a new model, probably next fall. But the XP machine should start up and not require any password for you to log in with. And then once the desktop comes up, you'll see the SQL developer in a second. Oracle, I've set up to automatically start on each one of those machines. So you don't have to go in and start up the Oracle server and start up the Oracle interface. It will automatically start for you. I'll show you how that's done later on in the class, so you at least have a feel for it. That is probably something, if you decide to set Oracle up on a home computer, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to handle. And I have some download instructions for 10 and 11, no, 10, which is the last time we set it up individually in the classroom. Oracle makes it a little difficult for you right now to set it up as a standalone, but it can be done. You have to read their instructions. And I confess, there have been times when I've clicked through an Oracle setup at a business and missed something and end up wiping the machine and starting all over again. So, RTFM. All right, spring 2015 is what we're looking for. And we'll open this folder. You'll click on Oracle. You want to open the console. Ken has recommended that we leave the XP machines on and not continue to cycle through them. I don't know why, but that's what he said. So it doesn't make sense to me, but yeah, I think it has something to do with the amount of resources we use when we actually start Oracle up. So I don't know if that's it, but he's always said leave them on. So try it, and I'll check with him again, James, and see what he says. And since he grew his beard, you know, he changes his mind. Open console is the command, and you'll see those of you who haven't used vSphere, I'll work with you tonight, or James or Lee possibly will help you out as we go through. Well, eventually you'll get out to the desktop, and what we are looking for is this icon right here, shortcut to SQL Developer. And this is where we'll do all of our work as we're working with SQL this semester. First time it starts up, you will more than likely see a screen like this, and from this screen, about the only thing you can really do is log in. Now, the login is already set up for you, and we're logging into this database right here, SQL Fundamentals, or SQL Fun. And I've had several students tell me that is a misnomer, but once you get into it, Oracle's fun. I love digging through databases. You'll want to click on SQL Fundamentals, and when you do that, the connection information will come up. For everything on this computer related to Oracle that you have to log into, the username is dbuser and the password is Oracle with a capital O. That makes it very, very simple. And then you click OK. Lee?
Is there a preceding space in front
No,
of
that it's just, well, there's no way to turn on the characters, so I had to cut and paste that. But there's no preceding space. It's like a normal login. Good question. Password is relatively normal that way. Once that password is accepted, you'll have access to SQL fundamentals. And this looks like a lot of information to go through, and it is. But we're not going to start with all of it. We're going to start eating little pieces and then get bigger. So what we're interested the most in are the tables assigned to SQL fundamentals. Quick quiz. If they're tables, what are they doing?
Entities about one subject, is that what you're talking about?
Yep, entities about one object. Very good. If I had my gold stars here, I'd give you one. All right, when we click on the plus sign and open up the tables folder, these are all the tables that we'll be working with this 8 weeks. Now, the ones that have dollar signs associated with them are actually system files relating to Oracle. Some of them you can open, some of them you can't, some of them you can change the data in, some of them you cannot. Just be aware they're there, and I would ignore them after that. Going down a little bit further, you'll notice customer demos, and the one that we're going to work with tonight, these are all different tables, so they're all different objects that we're collecting data about in our Oracle database. The one we're going to look at tonight is the table employee. And if we would go down, I actually picked L underbar employee for some reason. If you actually go down and take a look at this table, we've got the entity name, and then we have the attributes that define that entity. And we can go through and we can take a look at that. Now, I'll tell you what students have done in the past. There are 14 records in this database. And back when all I asked for was an answer, you could go in and you can manually figure out the answers to all of the queries that we're going to write. However, now you have to show the code too. So you can do that in a database that probably has up to 100 records. But when you get into the census database that we're going to use the end of this 8-week period and then in advanced databases, and you're talking about 1.5 million records or more, you can't go through there and figure out an answer manually. You have to use some sort of digital tool to do that for you. Now, later on we'll go through and we'll see that we can actually look at this data. We can look at not only what this data is composed of, but also when it was created and what sequence each of those attributes was created in. And sometimes that is an important piece of information in databases that you're working with. This is a printout of the L underbar employees definition, the table definition, and notice right here we've got the employee ID. That you would probably guess is a primary key, and the way we read this is we have to declare what it is, so it's a number. There are 3 values in this employee ID, and there are no decimal points. So we'll learn about setting this up a little bit later, but just a preview of what we do. Notice under nullable, it says no. So that's a good indicator in an Oracle database that could be a primary key. Now you'll see in some of the other entities that we look at that there'll be non-nullable fields in there also. But usually if it's a number and it cannot be null, then that's a good indicator it's a primary key. We can also assign default values if we want to. We can assign default comments. And where I mentioned the order that the objects were created, this is the order that each one of these attributes was created in. And you can actually go through and reorder these column names if you want to, but the column ID number will always remain the same. So you can look, we have a couple of different types of characters that we can use. Varchar and char, we'll talk about those a little bit later, but notice here that we have to declare the size of each one of the attributes that we're working with. Date's pretty simple. We've got higher date there, and we assign an attribute ID of date to it, and that will record the day, the month, the year, the hour, the minute, the second, and it will run out to hundreds or thousands of a second. Don't select thousandths of a second. By the way, if you don't have Oracle identify a time, it assigns a time of 1 minute after midnight on the date that the record was created. And so one of the things I did as manager of the Robbins-Joya unit over at Tinker was that we went through and we were having problems finding out when jobs were actually completed on different aircraft. And they were all showing that the aircraft were all completed on the graveyard shift. They came up at 12:01 a.m. And finally I said, wait a minute, that can't be right, because that's the default value in Oracle when you record a piece of data. And sure enough, we went through, and the contractor that had written the data collection defaulted the time value to the Oracle default value, which was a minute after midnight. So if you were trying to track how long it was taking to get a B-52 or a B-1 or a B-2 or an E-3 through depot maintenance, everything was based on a minute after midnight, and you couldn't tell a thing. Once we had it modified, then we were able to tell how long jobs were taking, and it gave us a much better picture of how we were able to process those aircraft through the depot. So the key to remember here is, if you don't tell Oracle to go out and get the system date and time when you create an entity instance, it's going to use a minute after midnight. Okay? Just the way it is. That's probably enough. We could talk about Varchar 2s and cars, but we'll do that in Chapter 2. One of the things that you might want to do is go through and take a look at the preferences, and that's on the top menu line. If you look at preferences, you might want to change the font, and it gives you a couple of options on fonts that you could have. Don't go with anything fancy like Broadway script or Boolean script or something like that. It's impossible to read once you start working in Oracle. It'll run it for you, but it's hard to read. The other thing you might want to do, and we'll look at that when we get the database up, is in the code editor, if the line numbers are not turned on, I would recommend you turn on the line numbers. And doing that gives you a much better feel for editing program problems, and you can look at it. Let's see, line numbers, null values. There was something else I wanted to talk to you about here. And we'll find the line number option and turn that on. Oh, as you get into doing work with SQL Developer, each query that you write has to end with a semicolon. And on a page in Developer, you can have multiple queries. But once you do that, you have to highlight the query that you want to run. And then you'll press the little green triangle to make that happen. So before we start this up on our own, are there any questions? Not right now. Okay. What I want to show you then, is not that. All right, your desktop will be a little cleaner than this desktop. This is my developmental one. By the way, I'll pass along to you, Rose State has an agreement with Oracle that we are an academic institution, and therefore we pay $500 and we can teach Oracle to as many students as we want to teach it to. However, we cannot use Oracle for any commercial development. So if you would please, if you want to do some commercial work with Oracle, download your own copy. And they do come on campus. They do check. The last time we were audited, we got a gold star, the equivalent of. And they allowed us to remain in that program. So if you're thinking about doing commercial work, please don't do it here in the lab, because we never know when they're going to show up. All right, SQL Developer, very easy to start. Just click on it. It may take a little bit of time to load depending on how many people are on the vSphere, how many people are on the network, and how often you've got it started up. Another reason we went to the vSphere computers on these is they now want deep freeze on all the lab computers, at least general lab computers. All right, this is what it looks like live. It'll have your name up here. We'll click on SQL Fundamentals. Password? No, Oracle with a capital O. You'll get the loading sign. Ignore the warning. This is something that they just added. If you ever get prompted to redo the password, just make it Oracle again, please. All right, and this is our SQL Developer. If you notice, I have my line numbers turned on. You can go up to Tools, come down here and look at Preferences. I would advise you between now and whenever we get back together that you come through here and take a look at the different functions that you can see with this. And I think line numbers is right along in here somewhere. You can set the colors that you want. You can set the line gutters. Oh, right. Line gutters is where line numbers are. So if line numbers aren't turned on, I'd recommend you turn those on your machine. So the first thing we want to look at are the tables, and we'll use L underbar employees right here. I'm going to click on it, and it'll show me, whoops, I'm going to click on it, come on. Click on it, and I can see the information about it. Notice we've got tabs set up here, so I'll go back to SQL Fundamentals. If I click on the plus sign, again, I can see all the information. And I'm going to write a very simple SQL command. Now, I'm not going to hold you to structure. I will tell you that some companies will hold you to a specific structure. They want all of the Oracle command words capitalized. They want to use camel case with their variables, and they'll have different things that you want to do. I know students that have gone to work for companies like that, and the students say, that's bullshit. I'll do it any way I want to do it. I'm not supposed to swear. That's crap. I'll do it any way I want to do it. And they say, thank you very much, goodbye. All right. Now, I'm not going to hold you to that. I'll show you some of the little picadillos that different businesses have in the area. But as long as you type the code in and it runs, I'm happy with that. Now, the way I like to do this is I put in all of my reserved words first. And the only two you really need to get an Oracle query started is the select word and the from word. Select tells us what we're going to see, and from tells Oracle where to get it. Now we're going to be real easy tonight. I'm going to select everything, all of the entity instances in the table L_bar employee. So that's real easy. I hit the wildcard symbol, or not the asterisk. Yeah, okay, yeah. What am I thinking of? Never mind. Okay, the wildcard symbol there, the time symbol, if you will. And then all I have to do is tell it what database I want to pull that from, what table in the database I want. Now, one of the reasons I hate SQL Developer is that it will prompt you to go out and select things. And it thinks right now that I want a table. Well, that's correct. And so all I'll do is click on L_bar employees, and it'll put it in for me. All right. To make my query complete, I have to add a semicolon. If you think you're going to go back and edit this query or add more lines to it, I go down and I put my semicolon on the very last line. You may also find out that sometimes you'll have your cursor there, or maybe down, you put some white space in and you go to click on the run triangle and it won't run your program. All right, Oracle's got a little confused. You have to go up and put the cursor somewhere within the code that you wrote, and it'll run. So when we look at it, the results window shows us that all the rows were fetched. That's a total of 10, and it did it in 0.078 seconds. For 10 rows, not too bad. And this is because I said I want to see all of the attributes for each entity instance. It's showing me everything that we have. Okay? That easy to work with. Now, let's say that I want to see only the employee ID numbers. That's interesting. It just dawned on me that when we brought Marie's machine up this morning, it had a different set of data in it. Well, it'd be interesting to see what you all have tonight. All right. If we want to select, let's say, all of the employee ID numbers that are under 7, we'd add in where, and we could even select from here employee ID, and it come on. There we go. We use the basic math symbols, less than, and now we have to give it a value. Since it's a number, we can just type it in. Now we'll run this one. And there are all the numbers, employee numbers less than 7.
So it automatically puts the colors on, like, what your keywords are and what your values are and what your tables are?
Exactly. It will, you can go in and change these colors. The default values are reserved words are dark blue, and just about everything else is non-bolded and just regular font. But you can go into the editor that we looked at where you can turn the line numbers on, and you can actually set whatever color combination you want. I had a young lady who's actually now working in databases for the state of Oklahoma, came in and color coded her SQL. So it looked really cute, except we've got a black and white printer in the room, so didn't do much good. But she had a lot of fun. Lee.
I studied PL, SQL years ago. This is a lot easier.
It is, and normally the way I teach it, we do SQL first, and then we do PL SQL next. And there are some limitations with SQL. And so if you're going to go on to be a database developer or a database coder, the process that Lee referred to, PL SQL or PL SQL, is a step up. It's a little more complicated language, but it allows you to do some things that we're not going to be able to do in SQL. And if you go on to advanced database with me, I think somewhere around week 7 or 8, we actually write a couple of PL SQL functions. And they're fun. You can do some really crazy things with them. And in fact, one of the data pull functions that my Robbins Joya team wrote over at Tinker actually used PL SQL to pull data from the DLA database in Richmond, Virginia, which was a lot of fun working with. You'll hear part of that story later on. Yes, ma'am.
It's looking like Oracle's awful close to, in some ways, SQL Express and SQL Server.
Yes,
Setup. It looks
very,
like,
very.
It looks almost identical on a lot of
And what you are seeing is the SQL language is pretty much transparent across relational database platforms. In fact, you can even go into Access and write SQL statements if you want to. But you are very correct. It is.
Just the format of how it looked when you first got in.
Yep.
It showed the database with the little
Yep.
disk and all. It looked just like SQL Server or SQL
Yeah.
Express.
One of the big differences between using SQL in Access and SQL in Oracle is that SQL in Access will do a lot for you. SQL in Oracle, you have to know what you're doing. And that's where we're going to start with. So let me see if there's anything else here I wanted to show you. I don't think there is. So we're going to stop recording. I'll back the slides up so you can take a look at it, and I want you to go through, try and log into your vSphere account, do some work with the SQL developer, and based on the very, very simple code that we have on the screen here, I'd like you to try and duplicate what I've done. Try a couple of wildcard queries. Try them against different entities that are listed in our SQL fundamentals database. And when you're comfortable, then you're clear to leave for tonight.
Do we need to save any of our
Not tonight.
Okay.
Not tonight. We will do that next Thursday. And I have a way for you to save them, actually print them out, so I can record them, scan them, and then either give them back to you or we'll shred them. So, for those of you playing at home, reference the PDF file.